Hi, everybody, and welcome to Alex Erm's Clips. Growing up in Byron Bay, life was both predictable and full of subtle charm. The kind of charm you only appreciate when you've lived there long enough to notice the details, the gentle crash of the waves against the shore, the smell of eucalyptus after a summer rain, and the way the whole town seemed to pause during sunsets, as if nature demanded our attention. It was a small town, with the same faces at the diner and the same stories passed around like worn-out records. But to me, it was home, even if I sometimes felt trapped by its familiarity. As a kid, I was always torn between big dreams and practical obligations. I'd sit on the rocky cliffs overlooking the ocean, sketching ideas for video games that I hoped one day would take the world by storm. But then reality would call, often in the form of my parents reminding me to focus on school or help out around the house. My dad ran a small repair shop, and I spent countless afternoons there, fixing everything from radios to fishing reels. It was satisfying work in its own way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was meant for more. And then there was Shona. She blew into my life like a warm breeze, unpredictable, comforting, and completely disarming. I still remember the first time we met. We were 12, and she had just moved into the house next door. Her family had come from Sydney, and she carried this air of city confidence that was completely foreign to a kid like me. I was shy back then, but Shona didn't give me the chance to be. She bounded up to me, grinning from ear to ear, and declared, "You're going to be my best friend. No arguments." We were inseparable through middle school and high school. Shona had this knack for making the mundane feel extraordinary. A trip to the corner store became an adventure when she was around, complete with ridiculous stories and inside jokes that only we understood. She loved art and would sketch me while I worked on my game ideas, teasing me about how serious I looked. "You're going to wrinkle early, Tim," she'd say, sticking her tongue out. But she believed in me, even when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. High school came and went in a blur of late-night study sessions, beach bonfires, and whispered dreams about what the future might hold. Shona wanted to be an artist. I wanted to create games. We promised each other that no matter what, we'd keep in touch, even if life pulled us in different directions. But as it turned out, life didn't separate us. Instead, it pulled us closer. We got married a few years after high school. It wasn't a grand love story in the traditional sense, no dramatic proposals or whirlwind romances. It felt more like a natural progression, like we were building on the friendship we'd always had. When Maddie was born, everything changed. Holding her for the first time, I felt a kind of love I hadn't known was possible. It wasn't just about Shona and me anymore. We had a little human depending on us. I threw myself into work, determined to provide for my family. That's when I started other games. At first, it was just me and a few close friends working out of a cramped garage, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. We poured everything we had into those early projects, and somehow it paid off. The company grew, and with it, so did my responsibilities. I was working 80, sometimes 90 hours a week, trying to balance my dreams with the reality of being a husband and a father. But the long hours came at a cost. Shona and I started to drift apart, not out of anger or resentment, but because we were living in two different worlds. She was at home raising Maddie, pouring her heart into being the best mom she could be while I was buried in spreadsheets and coding bugs. We tried to make it work, but eventually we had to face the truth. We were better as friends than as husband and wife. The divorce was amicable. If anything, it felt more like a mutual agreement to stop pretending. We sat at the kitchen table one night, a pot of tea between us, and decided that our friendship and Maddie's happiness were more important than holding on to a marriage that wasn't working. Shona and I promised each other we'd always be there for Maddie and for each other, and we kept that promise. After the divorce, we found a new rhythm. Shona started dating Rick, a great guy who treated Maddie like his own. I focused on expanding other games and spent every moment I could with Maddie. Life was simple again, predictable, even. And then Bridget came along, turning everything upside down. I first met Bridget at a conference in Sydney. She was a whirlwind of energy and charisma, the kind of person who lit up a room just by walking into it. I was there to talk about game development, but she made it impossible to focus on anything else. She introduced herself during a coffee break, flashing a smile so confident it was almost unnerving. "You're the other games guy, right?" The one who made Void Frontier? She asked, her tone casual but with a spark of genuine interest. I nodded, a little caught off guard. Yeah, that's me, Tim. She held out her hand and I shook it. Her grip was firm, her gaze unwavering. Bridget, I'm in marketing. Never played your game, but my nephew's obsessed. I figured I should at least meet the genius behind it. The word genius made me laugh. Genius might be a stretch, but thanks. What kind of marketing do you do? And just like that, a conversation started that didn't stop. We talked through the rest of the break, then the next session, and finally ended up grabbing dinner together after the conference wrapped for the day. Bridget was magnetic. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. Her laughter, loud and unrestrained. Her stories, colorful and dramatic. She was so different from anyone I'd met before, and I found myself wanting to know more about her. For weeks after, we stayed in touch, texting and calling each other late into the night. Bridget lived life at full speed, and being around her felt like a rush. It was exciting, intoxicating even. She was nothing like Shona, not better, not worse, just different. And after years of feeling like I was stuck in a routine, she made me feel alive. Before long, we were officially dating. Maddie, who was about 7 at the time, wasn't thrilled about the idea. She was polite to Bridget, but distant, her small arms crossed and her big, curious eyes always watching. I chalked it up to the natural resistance of a child seeing her dad with someone new. She'll warm up, Bridget would say with a breezy confidence. Kids always do. But Maddie didn't warm up. 8 months later, Bridget and I were married. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family. Shona was there, of course, with Rick. She even helped Maddie pick out a flower girl dress. Looking back, I wonder if Shona had her suspicions even then. She smiled and played her part, but there was a stiffness to her interactions with Bridget, a polite distance that I didn't question at the time. Life with Bridget was a whirlwind. She moved into my house, quickly making it her own with bold decorations and impulsive renovations. I didn't mind. I was busy with work and was happy to let her take the reins on the home front. For a while, everything felt perfect, or at least close enough. But then little things started to gnaw at me. Bridget had a way of glossing over questions, especially when they dug too deep into her past. I'd ask about her family, and she'd deflect with a joke or change the subject. She seemed to know everyone in town, yet no one seemed to know her well. There were nights she'd come home late, her phone glued to her hand, smiling at messages she never explained. Shona noticed before I did. She sat me down one evening after dropping Maddie off and asked, "Tim, have you ever wondered if Bridget is completely honest with you?" It caught me off guard. "What are you talking about?" I asked, defensive. Shona hesitated, her brow furrowed in that familiar way that meant she was choosing her words carefully. Let's just say she doesn't seem like someone who's all in. Not with you, not with Maddie. I brushed it off. Shona and I were friends, but this felt like overstepping. I told her I appreciated her concern, but that everything was fine, and for a while, I convinced myself it was true. The truth hit me like a freight train a year later, delivered in the form of a plain white envelope. Shona handed it to me after one of Maddie's soccer games, her expression serious. "You need to see this," she said, her voice low. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Just read it when you're ready." I didn't open it right away. I tossed it onto my desk at home and stared at it for days, too afraid of what I might find. Finally, late one night, I opened it. Inside were photographs, text messages, and a USB drive. I didn't need to look far to understand what it all meant. Bridget had been seeing someone else. Brad. The pictures showed them together, not just recently, but from years before I'd even met her. The messages painted an even darker picture. She'd never stopped seeing him, even after we were married. Worse, one particular conversation chilled me to the bone. "Bridget, it's just a matter of time. Once I'm pregnant, he'll never question it." Brad, "You sure he'll buy it?" Bridget, "Of course. Tim's too busy to notice anything." My hands shook as I read it. She'd planned to pass off Brad's child as mine, banking on my trust and obliviousness. I couldn't believe it. All the little doubts and red flags I'd ignored came rushing back in an overwhelming wave of anger and betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I replayed every interaction I'd had with Bridget, searching for clues I'd missed. How could I have been so blind? And what did I do now? By morning, I had my answer. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. By morning, the anger that had simmered all night hardened into resolve. I wasn't just angry. I felt humiliated, used, and betrayed in the deepest sense. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated deception, designed to manipulate me into a life built on lies. But I wasn't going to let her win. The first thing I did was call Shona. She deserved to know I'd seen the evidence and what I planned to do. She picked up on the second ring. "You opened it, didn't you?" she asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Yeah, I did." My voice was steady, but I could feel the weight of my words. She's been lying to me this whole time. Shona let out a long sigh, her tone both sympathetic and firm. "I'm sorry, Tim. I know this isn't easy, but you need to act fast. She's not going to stop unless you stop her." She was right, of course. Shona always had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of things. "I need your help," I admitted. "You've got it," she said without hesitation. The first step was to secure my assets. I met with my lawyer that same day, laying everything out. The infidelity, the financial concerns, and the brazen plan Bridget had discussed in her messages. My lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Diane, nodded as I spoke, already drafting a plan in her head. "First, we freeze her access to your accounts," Diane said, her pen scratching across a legal pad. "Joint credit cards, banking, everything. You're removing her from your will and any beneficiary designations immediately. I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the day." By the time I left Diane's office, I felt like I had some semblance of control again. Bridget wouldn't know it yet, but her free ride was about to end. That evening, I canceled the joint credit cards and changed the locks on the house. I also revoked her gate code to the property, a move I knew would spark questions but didn't care. She didn't deserve access to my home anymore. Bridget found out the next day. She called me as I was driving Maddie to school. "Tim, my gate code isn't working. What's going on?" Her voice was clipped, impatient, like I was inconveniencing her. I pulled over, deciding this wasn't a conversation to have with Maddie in the car. "Bridget, we need to talk. I know about Brad. I know about everything." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but no less calculated. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I know about the affair. I know about your plan to pass off his kid as mine, and I know you've been lying to me since day one." Her composure cracked just slightly. "Tim, it's not what you think." "Save it," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You're done. I've frozen your access to our accounts, canceled your credit cards, and filed for divorce. You're not welcome in my house, and you won't get another dime from me. You brought this on yourself." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Bridget tried to fight back, of course. She filed for divorce before I could, demanding a sizable chunk of my assets. But Diane had anticipated her every move. The evidence Shona had provided was damning enough to paint a clear picture of her infidelity and bad faith. She had no legal ground to stand on. Meanwhile, Maddie seemed to sense the tension, even if she didn't fully understand it. One night, after dinner, she climbed into my lap and looked up at me with her wide, serious eyes. "Daddy, are you mad at Bridget?" I sighed, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I'm mad at some of the choices Bridget made, but it's not your fault, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." "Do we have to see her again?" she asked hesitantly. "No," I said firmly, pulling her into a hug. "You don't have to see her again if you don't want to." Maddie nodded and rested her head on my chest. "Good." Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Brad made his presence known in the most dramatic way possible. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon. Maddie and I were walking along the beach, enjoying the sunshine, when I noticed a figure approaching us. It was Brad. He looked furious, his body tense as he closed the distance between us. "You think you can just ruin her life and get away with it?" he spat, his voice low and threatening. "Stay behind me, Maddie," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What Bridget and I had is none of your business," Brad continued, stepping closer. "You're nothing but a pathetic—" Before he could finish, Maddie surprised both of us. She stepped out from behind me, her small frame rigid with anger. "Leave my dad alone!" she shouted. Brad sneered, raising his hand as if to push her aside, but I stepped in, shoving him back with all the force I could muster. "Don't you dare touch her," I growled. The altercation ended with police intervention. Brad was arrested for assault, and Maddie and I spent the evening in the hospital being treated for minor injuries. It was a stark reminder of how far Bridget and Brad were willing to go to defend their lives. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce was finalized, and Bridget was left with nothing more than the clothes she came in with. Brad faced charges for the assault, and I made sure there was a restraining order in place to protect Maddie and me. Through it all, Shona remained my rock. She and Rick offered their support without hesitation, and Maddie found solace in the stability of our blended family. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I was determined to make it a happy one. The divorce left me feeling like a shell of myself. Even with Maddie and Shona's unwavering support, there were days I felt unmoored, as though the betrayal had eroded my sense of who I was. It wasn't just Bridget's deceit that hurt. It was the time I had invested in a relationship that turned out to be nothing but a facade. I threw myself into work. My company, Other Games, was thriving, and my team rallied around me during this rough patch. Maddie became my constant source of joy, her bright laughter reminding me that despite everything, I had a lot to be grateful for. Still, something was missing. It was my 31st birthday when my path crossed with someone who would change everything. Shona had insisted on throwing a party at her house, and while I wasn't keen on celebrating, I went along with it for Maddie's sake. She loved any excuse for balloons and cake. The house was packed with friends, coworkers, and neighbors. Maddie had taken it upon herself to help Shona's husband, Rick, grill burgers in the backyard. I was nursing a drink when I saw her. She was standing near the pool, looking somewhat out of place among the crowd. Her dark hair framed her face, and there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. I noticed her hesitating as she pulled a cigarette from her pocket, seemingly debating whether to light it. Before I could say anything, Maddie and her cousin Greg ran past her, accidentally bumping her shoulder. Startled, she stepped back and lost her balance, falling straight into the pool. There was a collective gasp, followed by awkward laughter as people realized she wasn't hurt. I moved without thinking, offering her a hand as she climbed out, dripping wet and glaring at Greg, who looked mortified. "Sorry about that," I said, handing her a towel. She looked up at me, water streaming from her hair. "Not your fault," she muttered, though her cheeks were flushed. "Kids will be kids, I guess." Her name was Lily. She'd recently moved to Byron Bay after a rough divorce of her own. Over the course of the evening, we found ourselves sitting on the patio, talking. She told me about the life she'd left behind. A high-pressure corporate job in the city, a husband who prioritized status over substance, and the heartbreaking loss of a child that ultimately ended their marriage. "I needed a fresh start," she said, her voice soft but steady. "This place, it's quieter, calmer. I think I needed that." I found myself opening up to her in return, sharing my own experiences with heartbreak and betrayal. There was an unspoken understanding between us, as if we both recognized the scars the other carried. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I started spending more time together. It wasn't planned or forced. It just happened. She joined Maddie and me for dinner occasionally, or come along for our weekend trips to the beach. Maddie took to her quickly, which both warmed my heart and terrified me. After what had happened with Bridget, I was cautious about letting someone new into our lives, but Lily wasn't trying to take over or replace anyone. She was simply there, a steady presence that felt right. One evening, after Maddie had gone to bed, Lily and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. "I think you're brave," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. I laughed softly. "Brave? For what?" "For picking up the pieces," she said, her gaze meeting mine. "For building something new after everything you've been through." Her words lingered long after she left that night. The first time I kissed Lily, it was under the soft glow of the porch light. She had come over for dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and a batch of cookies she swore were experimental. After Maddie went to bed, we lingered in the kitchen, laughing about some silly story she'd told. The laughter faded, and for a moment, we just stood there, the air between us charged. Without thinking, I leaned in, and to my relief, she met me halfway. It wasn't fireworks or dramatic music. It was warm, steady, and real. When we pulled apart, she smiled, her cheeks pink. "Took you long enough." Of course, nothing was ever easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where our past wounds threatened to pull us apart. But Lily had a way of grounding me, reminding me that it was okay to let someone in again. She became an integral part of our lives, not by forcing her way in, but by being exactly who she was. Maddie adored her, and even Shona, who was fiercely protective of me, gave her stamp of approval. The day I proposed to Lily, it wasn't some grand gesture or elaborate plan. It was a quiet evening at home. Maddie curled up on the couch between us as we watched one of her favorite movies. I glanced at Lily, her face lit by the soft glow of the screen, and I knew. "I love you," I said, the words spilling out before I could overthink them. "And I don't want to spend another day without you." She turned to me, her eyes wide, and then she smiled. "I love you too." It was simple, perfect, and exactly what we needed. Lily and I got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. Shona and Rick stood by my side. Maddie walked Lily down the aisle, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt whole. We welcomed our own little chaos into the world not long after. Triplets, of all things. Life became a whirlwind of sleepless nights and joyful mornings, and though it wasn't always easy, it was ours. Through it all, Lily remained my anchor, my partner, and my greatest source of strength. She taught me that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up every day, no matter what. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Lily and I quickly realized we had to divide and conquer to keep the household running smoothly. Mornings were a blur of diaper changes, bottle feedings, and getting Maddie ready for school. Evenings brought bath time, bedtime stories, and the rare moment of quiet where we could collapse on the couch together, too exhausted to talk, but grateful for each other's presence. Despite the whirlwind, we found our rhythm. We learned to embrace the imperfections. Sometimes dinner was just scrambled eggs and toast, and sometimes the laundry piled up so high that it felt like it had its own gravitational pull. But none of it mattered when we'd sit on the floor with the kids, building blanket forts, or laughing at the ridiculous noises Jessie discovered she could make. Even as we built our life together, shadows from the past occasionally crept in. Bridget, now estranged from her own family, occasionally tried to reach out. Once, she sent a long, rambling letter apologizing for her actions and asking to meet Maddie. I didn't respond. Maddie didn't need that kind of disruption in her life, and I didn't trust Bridget's intentions. When I showed the letter to Lily, she supported my decision without hesitation. "She's had her chances," Lily said softly, her hand resting on mine. "Your job now is to protect Maddie, not to give Bridget more opportunities to hurt her." As the triplets grew, life settled into something resembling order. Connor developed a love for dinosaurs. Adam insisted on carrying around a sketch pad everywhere he went, and Jessie discovered she had a knack for climbing anything and everything. Maddie flourished in school, excelling in art and surprising us with her talent for storytelling. I saw so much of Shona in her sharp wit, her compassion, and her fierce loyalty. Shona remained an integral part of our lives. She and Rick had become a second set of parents to the triplets, and Maddie often spent weekends at their house. It was a unique dynamic, but one that worked for all of us. Lily, too, found her footing. She joined the local council and quickly became a respected advocate for community programs. Watching her fight for better playgrounds and after-school programs for kids reminded me of how strong and passionate she was. She often brought her work home, using our dinner table as a temporary office to spread out proposals and plans. Maddie loved helping by coloring on the margins of her documents, and even the triplets got in on the action, toddling around with crayons clutched in their tiny fists. Life threw us another curveball when Adam fell ill one winter. What we thought was a common cold turned into a week-long hospital stay, as doctors ran tests to determine the cause of his high fever and fatigue. The nights in the hospital were long and full of worry. Lily stayed by Adam's side while I split my time between the hospital and home, ensuring Maddie and the other two kids were taken care of. It was during one of those quiet, late-night hospital moments that Lily looked at me, exhaustion and love etched into her face, and said, "We'll get through this. Together." She was right. Adam recovered and we returned home, more grateful than ever for the small, everyday moments we'd once taken for granted. One summer afternoon, while the kids were napping and Lily and I were enjoying a rare, quiet moment on the porch, a car pulled into the driveway. To my surprise, Shona stepped out, followed by someone I hadn't seen in years, Bridget's mother, Marion. Marion looked older, her face lined with worry and regret. She clutched a small bag and a folder as she approached us. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," she began, her voice trembling, "but there's something I need to tell you about Bridget." Lily tensed beside me, her hand instinctively finding mine. Marion explained that Bridget had been in trouble with the law again, this time for financial fraud. She'd also been battling addiction and had alienated everyone who had once supported her. "She's asking for help," Marion said, tears streaming down her face, "but I don't know if I can do it alone. She's still my daughter, but I don't know if she'll ever change." I didn't know what to say. Bridget had caused so much pain, not just to me, but to Maddie and everyone around her. Offering her any kind of help felt like inviting chaos back into our lives. "She made her choices," Lily said firmly, her voice steady but not unkind. "You're not responsible for fixing everything she's broken." Marion left shortly after, and while her visit stirred up old emotions, it also reaffirmed the life we had built. Lily was right. Our focus needed to remain on the family we'd created and the future we were building together. That evening, as we tucked the kids into bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had weathered storms, faced heartbreak, and found love again. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free to dream about the future. As life settled back into its usual rhythm, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd come. Lily and I were partners in every sense of the word, raising our kids, managing work, and carving out moments of joy in between the chaos. The triplets were growing fast. Too fast, it seemed some days. Connor was now obsessed with sports, running around the backyard with a soccer ball and yelling out imaginary plays. Adam's artistic side flourished. His drawings covered our fridge, the walls, and sometimes even the furniture when he got carried away. Jessie, always the climber, decided she wanted to learn gymnastics. Lily and I agreed, though it meant adding yet another activity to our packed schedule. Maddie, on the other hand, was entering her teenage years with confidence and curiosity. She'd started exploring photography, using an old camera I had lying around to capture the world through her eyes. Her photos were surprisingly good, and I found myself in awe of her ability to find beauty in the mundane. One day, as I was reviewing plans for a new game launch, Maddie approached me with a question I wasn't expecting. "Dad, can I do an internship with you this summer?" she asked, holding her camera. I raised an eyebrow. "At other games? You sure you want to spend your summer working with your old man?" She rolled her eyes but grinned. "I think it'd be cool. Plus, I could help with the marketing stuff, photos, videos, that kind of thing." I was touched. Maddie had always been fiercely independent, so the fact that she wanted to spend time with me and contribute to something I cared about meant the world. "All right," I said, "but no slacking off. You'll be an official intern, not just the boss's kid." She laughed. "Deal." That summer was one of the best we'd ever had. In between work and the usual chaos at home, we managed to squeeze in a family trip to a cabin by the lake. It was the first time we'd traveled with all 4 kids, and while it was a logistical nightmare, it was worth every second. The triplets were thrilled by the freedom to run around outside, building sandcastles on the shore and chasing each other through the woods. Maddie, true to her budding photographer self, spent hours capturing the landscape and candid moments of the family. One evening, as the sun set over the water, we all gathered around a fire pit. Maddie showed off her photos, Connor roasted marshmallows, and Adam and Jessie worked together to build the perfect s'more. Lily leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "This," she said softly, "is everything I ever wanted." Not long after we returned home, life threw us another curveball. Lily started experiencing severe headaches that wouldn't go away. At first, we thought it was just stress. Raising 4 kids and juggling everything else wasn't exactly easy, but when the headaches persisted, I insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis was a rare but treatable condition. While it wasn't life-threatening, it required surgery and a lengthy recovery process. I'll never forget the night she broke down, finally admitting how scared she was. "What if I can't do it all anymore?" she whispered. I held her tightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll get through it together," I said. "You don't have to do it all. That's why I'm here." The surgery went smoothly, but the recovery period tested all of us. Shona and Rick stepped up in ways I hadn't expected, taking the triplets for weekends so I could focus on helping Lily. Maddie took on more responsibility at home, even managing to keep her siblings entertained during the long days when I was stretched thin. Through it all, Lily's strength amazed me. Even on her worst days, she found a way to smile, to reassure the kids, and to remind me that this was just a bump in the road. Once Lily fully recovered, it felt like a weight had been lifted. She returned to her council work with renewed passion, throwing herself into projects that brought the community closer together. I noticed a change in her, not just physically, but emotionally. She seemed lighter, freer, as if facing her own vulnerability had made her stronger. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "Open it and find out." Inside was a keychain with a tiny engraved controller and a heart. "For all the games we've played together," she said with a smile, "and for the ones still to come." Life isn't perfect. It never is. There are still moments of frustration, sleepless nights, and challenges that test our patience. But there's also laughter, love, and a sense of togetherness that I wouldn't trade for anything. Watching my kids grow, seeing Lily thrive, and knowing that we've built this life together, messy and unpredictable as it may be, fills me with a kind of joy I never thought I'd find. And as I sit here now, writing this while the triplets run around the backyard, Maddie clicks away on her camera, and Lily leans against the porch railing with a cup of tea, I can't help but smile. The best parts of life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones that surprise you, the ones you fight for, and the ones you hold on to when the world feels uncertain. This is my life, and it's exactly where I'm meant to be. The steady rhythm of life seemed to lull us into a fragile sense of normalcy. The kids were thriving, and Lily was fully recovered, but life, as always, had its twists waiting for us. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen making pancakes with the triplets, who were more interested in playing with the batter than cooking. Maddie sat at the table, scrolling through her phone and occasionally chiming in with sarcastic comments about our culinary chaos. The sound of the doorbell startled all of us. Visitors weren't unusual, but something about this moment felt different. "I'll get it," Maddie said, hopping up before I could. Seconds later, she called back, "Dad, there's a woman here asking for you." I wiped my hands and went to the door. Standing there was someone I hadn't seen in years, Bridget. She looked different. Her once perfectly styled hair was messy, her face drawn and pale. She was clutching a small purse and fidgeting nervously. "Tim," she said, her voice trembling, "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need your help." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. Memories of her betrayal flooded back, but the desperation in her eyes kept me from slamming the door. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She hesitated, glancing back at her car parked awkwardly on the curb. "I've made mistakes, big ones, but I'm in trouble, Tim. I have nowhere else to go." Against my better judgment, I let her inside. Lily was out running errands, so I led Bridget to the living room while the kids stayed in the kitchen. Maddie hovered nearby, watching with a suspicious glare. Bridget explained her situation. After her arrest and the divorce, she spiraled into debt and lost custody of her own child, a son I hadn't even known existed. Now, she was being evicted and had nowhere to turn. "Why come to me?" I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Because," she said, her voice breaking, "you're the only person I know who might care. You were always better than me." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, to send her away without a second thought. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the part of me that still believed in redemption, or maybe it was the thought of what example I'd set for my kids. When Lily came home, I told her everything. She listened patiently, her expression calm but thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" she asked, after a long pause. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to help her, but I can't forget what she did. Lily nodded. You don't have to forget, but maybe this is about who you are, not who she was. Her words stayed with me. After some deliberation, I decided to help Bridget, but on strict terms: temporary financial support to get her back on her feet and access to legal resources to help her regain custody of her son. Helping Bridget wasn't easy. Maddie was vocal about her disapproval, and even Lily admitted she struggled with the decision at times. But slowly, Bridget began to change. She found a job, started therapy, and made amends where she could. The kids were curious about her presence in our lives, especially the triplets, who didn't understand the complicated history. Maddie, however, remained skeptical, often reminding me of Bridget's past. One evening, as Maddie and I were cleaning up after dinner, she finally voiced her concerns. "Dad, why are you doing this? She doesn't deserve it." I paused, unsure how to explain. Maybe not, but sometimes doing the right thing isn't about what someone deserves. It's about what kind of person you want to be. Maddie didn't say anything, but I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Months passed, and Bridget slowly rebuilt her life. She eventually regained custody of her son, a quiet boy named Ethan, who instantly charmed the triplets with his shy smile and love of dinosaurs. By the time Bridget and Ethan moved into their own apartment, the animosity between her and Maddie had softened. On their last day with us, Bridget pulled me aside. "Thank you, Tim," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You didn't have to do any of this, but you gave me a chance to start over. I'll never forget it. Life moved on, but the experience changed all of us." Maddie started volunteering at a local shelter, inspired by what she'd seen with Bridget. The triplets, as young as they were, learned about forgiveness and the importance of helping others. Lily and I grew even closer, our bond strengthened by the challenges we faced together. Through it all, I realized that while the past will always be part of who we are, it doesn't have to define us. Sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful growth. And as I watched my family laughing together around the dinner table one night, I knew that despite everything, we were exactly where we were meant to be. So, dear friends, if you're enjoying these stories, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more juicy relationship tales. Thanks for your support.